Before the NHL became a league of global stars, there were three young men trapped behind an empire. Three futures written by a system that claimed to own them. One disappeared into the night. One broke from the machine in silence. This was the first crack in the wall. Our first story begins in May of 1989. The night a 20-year-old star vanished from Soviet control and sent shockwaves across two continents. Alexander Mogilny was a young soldier trapped in a system that controlled everything. Then, he made a choice. Almost no one survived. This is the story of his escape through Stockholm, and the Sabres' desperate plan to get him out alive. One wrong move, and the world would have never learned his name. Alexander Mogilny's fight for freedom began in the spring of 1989. He was only 20 years old, fresh off a gold medal at the World Championship in Stockholm, but he felt like a prisoner inside the Soviet system. He was a soldier in the Red Army Club, a place where Viktor Tikhonov's strict rules controlled every hour of his day. Even things like housing, travel, and training were locked behind military discipline, giving him almost no control over his own life. By then, Soviet officials already suspected he might flee. Earlier that year, they had even demoted him to the junior team during a tour in the United States, keeping him as far away from any chance to defect as possible. But Stockholm gave him one final opening. He made a secret phone call to the Buffalo Sabres, the team that drafted him, and told them the time had come. Sabres GM Jerry Meehan and scout Don Luce flew to Sweden immediately, knowing the risks if they failed. Their first meeting happened inside a team hotel. It was quick, quiet, just enough to confirm that Mogilny was serious. A second meeting was planned at his agent's apartment, but a warning came through the phone. Someone was watching. The group changed plans and moved the meeting to a mall, hoping to blend into the crowd while still giving Mogilny a way out. When Mogilny and his agent finally approached the Sabres car, panic hit. Several men stepped into view behind them. Mogilny dove into the back seat and slammed the door while Luce spotted the figures in the mirror. It looked like Soviet officials were closing in. Luce pulled away fast, starting a 3-day stretch that felt more like a spy mission than a hockey rescue. The group switched hotels every night. Meehan gathered the documents needed for travel, while the others planned each move carefully. Luce drove Mogilny through back roads to stay hidden. At one point, Mogilny tried to call home from a public phone booth. The call cut twice, and Mogilny rushed back to the car, shaken, saying, "They know where we are." At times, he worried they might turn a corner and find him. And no one slept more than a few minutes at a time. Reports later claimed the military viewed his defection as desertion. His family faced questions and pressure from officials, and he feared the fallout would reach them. There was no guarantee he would ever see them again. Even then, he kept going, convinced this was the only way to keep moving forward. When the group headed toward the airport, things tightened again. A newspaper had leaked details of the defection, printing their names and describing the operation. The only thing left secret was their current hotel, which likely kept them from being intercepted. Under heavy secrecy, they boarded a flight to New York. At JFK Airport, American officials pulled Mogilny aside for questioning, which was standard for high-profile defectors. Officials granted him political asylum soon after. The Soviet government lashed out in its state press, accusing the Sabres of stealing him. Mogilny was finally safe. By early October, a U.S. visa sat in his hands, and he showed it off proudly. It felt like the first real proof that he was actually free. Years later, he summed it up saying that he didn't see any future in the Soviet system, and he believed that the United States offered him a real life. It took courage most people never have to use, but that moment shaped everything he became. When Alexander Mogilny landed in North America in 1989, everything around him felt fast, open, and unfamiliar. He was no longer surrounded by teammates or officials, and for the first time, he had to build a life without anyone guiding his daily steps. Now he was a Buffalo Sabre, wearing the number 89 as a tribute to both his draft slot and the year he broke free. It was a small gesture from the team, but it meant more to him than they knew. His first NHL moment became a symbol of everything he hoped to build. On his very first shift, in his very first game, he touched the puck, took a step, and scored. 20 seconds into his debut, the underdog who risked everything stunned an entire arena. The crowd erupted, players stared, and suddenly this quiet young man who spoke only a little English looked like a player who belonged on a top line. Buffalo fans fell for him instantly and cheered every time he touched the ice. But off the ice, everything felt harder. North America moved fast, with routines and choices he never had faced before. Even simple moments, buying food, picking out clothes, trying to follow conversations, reminded him how far he was from home. He had studied English, but speaking it in real time felt like jumping into cold water. His support system came from a familiar place. His friend and agent, Sergei Fedorov, stayed in Buffalo with his wife, helping Mogilny with meals, errands, and team logistics. They became his support structure, steadying him while he tried to rebuild his life from scratch. But even with their help, the isolation stayed with him. Every quiet moment made him wonder if he would ever see his parents again, or if his escape had separated them for good. On the ice, teammates noticed how easy the game looked for him. Coaches talked about his speed, saying he hadn't even begun to use it fully. In preseason games, he made end-to-end rushes that left people shocked. In practice, his effortless speed stood out immediately. Language didn't matter. He saw the game clearly, understood the flow, and found open ice without guidance. Still, he needed time to grow. The defensive structure in Buffalo felt restrictive to a player trained in free-flowing Soviet hockey. In Russia, the game encouraged creativity, angles, and offensive rhythm. In Buffalo, the focus leaned toward responsibility and caution. Mogilny admitted he struggled with the adjustment. He wanted to attack, not hold back. He wanted movement, not structure. But he kept learning, kept adding to his game, and kept finding ways to show his talent. His rookie season ended with 15 goals and 43 points in 65 games. Modest numbers on the stat sheet, but encouraging signs for someone navigating a new life and a new league. Each season, he took a noticeable step forward. 30 goals in his second year, 39 in his third. As his confidence grew and the game began to slow down for him, everything started to click. He finally looked like a player breaking through. Then came a moment that showed just how quickly he was adapting. On a road trip to Toronto, he missed the team bus. But instead of panicking, he simply drove himself and still beat it there. It was a small story, but it revealed everything. He solved problems, he adjusted fast, and he never waited for someone else to clear his path. The fans in Buffalo made him feel welcome in a way he didn't expect. They admired his fearlessness on the ice and respected the risks he took to get there. Every cheer helped chip away at the loneliness he had carried from the moment he walked away from the Soviet team hotel. The underdog who fled the KGB was becoming a hometown favorite, and he hadn't even reached his full potential yet. And then something changed. Mogilny wasn't just fitting in anymore. He was beginning to separate from everyone around him. He was no longer the kid who defected. He was evolving into a force the NHL had no blueprint for. When the 1992 season began, Mogilny stepped onto the ice like a player entering his prime. Suddenly, his game carried a new edge. Every shift looked faster, cleaner, and more dangerous. The Sabres had just added the last piece he needed to unlock another level. That piece was Pat LaFontaine, an elite center whose speed and vision matched Mogilny's in a way no one expected. From their first shifts together, the connection felt instant. LaFontaine could place the puck anywhere, and Mogilny could get everywhere. Their line became a storm that teams couldn't prepare for. One would carry the puck wide while the other slipped into open ice. One would draw defenders while the other cut through a gap no one thought existed. It looked smooth, but it was sharp. It looked simple, but it was lethal. As the season unfolded, Mogilny scored in bursts that lifted arenas. He scored on breakaways where he turned defensemen into shadows. He scored from angles that made goalies shake their heads. He scored off passes so quickly that even his teammates needed a moment to notice what just happened. Every night felt like another step towards something historic. Coaches adjusted, defenders tightened gaps, and goalies studied every shot he took. None of it mattered. Mogilny had reached a level where instinct carried him. What set him apart was how little he needed. Even in crowded lanes, he turned half chances into goals, the kind of conversion rate the league rarely saw from a player his age. His pace climbed into a rare territory. He stacked hat tricks throughout the year, each one pushing his pace deeper into territory only a few players had ever reached. Reporters started asking if he could hit numbers only legends had touched. By the end of the season, he had hit 76 goals in 77 games. It tied him with Winnipeg star rookie Teemu Selanne and placed him among the rare players who have ever pushed a season into that territory. Only a handful of players had ever gone higher, and they were the giants of the sport. Mogilny, the underdog from years earlier, now stood beside them. His partnership with LaFontaine became one of the most dangerous duos in the league, piling up points that pushed Buffalo into a strong playoff run. Looking back, people often wonder why Mogilny reached that level in that specific season. Coaches pointed to freedom. He was finally allowed to play with creativity again. Teammates pointed to comfort. He carried the offense with a calm that hadn't been there before. Fans pointed to talent, the kind that made him move in ways no one else on the roster could match. All of those answers were true, but something deeper was happening. The skill he had carried since childhood, the instincts shaped in Soviet hockey, and the determination that brought him across an ocean had finally merged into one unstoppable form. After 76 goals, the truth was undeniable. Mogilny wasn't just a gifted scorer, he became the rare player who could dominate the league from opening night to the final game. His breakout didn't end with the season. It reshaped how the league viewed him and what it expected from every Russian star who followed. Alexander Mogilny's legacy stretches far beyond goals and highlight plays. He was the first Soviet star to defect and truly thrive, and that decision changed the hopes of an entire generation. Suddenly, Russian players could picture a life and a career on the other side. And Mogilny's reach only grew when he stepped into a role no Russian had ever taken on. In 1993, Mogilny became the first Russian captain in NHL history while leading Buffalo during Pat LaFontaine's injury. It was a quiet statement that changed how teams viewed leadership from European players. He didn't talk much, but his teammates trusted him. He earned that C through work, skill, and presence, not by volume. This step made him a symbol for every future Russian star who dreamed of leading a team at the highest level. His story then moved to West Vancouver, where he proved his skill wasn't tied to one system or one city. In the 1995-96 season, he scored 55 goals and 107 points, showing he was still among the best forwards in the league. His next chapter delivered the moment every player dreams about. In 2000, Mogilny joined the New Jersey Devils and finally lifted the Stanley Cup. It completed one of the rarest achievements in hockey. He entered the Triple Gold Club with an Olympic gold from 1988, a World Championship gold from 1989, and now the Cup. Only a small group of players in history have all three. Even after the championship, Mogilny kept finding new ways to evolve. In 2000-2001, he led the Devils in goals. Then, after signing with Toronto, he became their top scorer in 2002-03 and won the Lady Byng Trophy. By the time he retired, Mogilny had 473 goals and 1,032 points in 990 games. He joined the 1,000-point club, earned multiple All-Star team honors, and held scoring records that stood untouched for years. But the numbers alone don't explain his influence. His defection encouraged Sergei Fedorov, Pavel Bure, and a long list of Russian stars to make the same leap. Modern legends like Alex Ovechkin and Yevgeny Malkin credit early pioneers for breaking the fear barrier. Mogilny was at the front of that line. His story came full circle after he stopped playing. As an executive in the KHL with Amur Khabarovsk, he helped guide young players from the same region he once left behind. It showed how far he had traveled, both in life and in the game. Fans pushed hard for his Hall of Fame induction in 2024, calling it long overdue. 1 year later, in 2025, he finally entered the Hockey Hall of Fame. It became a moment that praised both his skill and the courage that changed the sport. He had outrun the KGB, lit the NHL on fire, and opened a path that countless players now follow. The move he made became the model others used when they followed him into the league. If Mogilny broke the front door open, Sergei Fedorov slipped out the back, quietly rewriting hockey history. Detroit was ready. The door was not. The 20-year-old Soviet star Sergei Fedorov stood in a quiet hallway listening for footsteps that could end everything.
I thought at that time I'm never going to see my parents again.
Inside, Red Wings staff whispered into phones. One delay would erase years of planning.
My phone. Some guy from the State Department, you know the whereabouts of Sergei Fedorov. Sergei basically said, yes.
If he stayed, his life was controlled. If he ran, his family would pay the price. This was the last moment his life still belonged to someone else.
A little bit scary, a little bit exciting. Probably more exciting than scary because I'm not going to be starving to death here.
Sergei Fedorov moved through the hallway with deliberate control, each step measured, knowing that panic would give him away. In another part of the building, Detroit Red Wings staff were scattered. If the timing slipped, if the wrong person noticed, this entire plan collapsed. Only months earlier, none of this felt real. Years later, Detroit would call this theft. That night, it felt like survival. Fedorov was still inside the Soviet system, still watched, still documented, still told where to be and when. He was a prized asset, but also a possession. His calls were monitored, and even the idea of leaving the country was treated like a crime. For the Soviet team, losing Fedorov would mean losing face on the world stage. The Red Wings made contact without leaving a trail. Not with a press release or a contract waved in the air, but with whispers. Reporter Keith Gaves secretly passed him a team guide with a letter hidden inside. Reading it meant crossing a line you couldn't step back over. Fedorov didn't say yes right away. He couldn't. It meant risking what might happen to his parents and his younger brother back home. It meant becoming something dangerous in the eyes of people who once praised him. He waited, finishing his military service while watching for an opening. The Goodwill Games in Portland provided the opening. It was one of the rare moments when the system loosened its grip just enough to slip through. The game was against the USA on July 22, 1990. Fedorov had scored in the game, but the only number that mattered now was the number on the limo door. The plan was simple because it had to be. No bags, no hesitation, no second thoughts. Back in the hallway, Fedorov reached the corner. His heart was pounding now. He saw the signal, the paper. The door behind him stayed closed. For a brief moment, everything held still. Then the elevator opened. Out stepped his roommate, Valery Zelapukin.
When he went up, I told my roommate I'm going to Detroit.
Fedorov embraced his friend and pressed the saved rubles into his hand. Money meant as protection and goodbye. He risked the plan for this. Then Fedorov turned and walked out the back door. The limo was waiting. The door closed. The city slid by in silence. No one spoke. The airport lights appeared faster than expected. Somewhere behind them, someone was starting to realize what had happened. The private jet door shut with a dull sound that felt heavier than it should. Engine started, the plane moved. Only then did Fedorov allow himself to sit back. There was no cheering, no relief, just silence. As the plane took off, one thought kept repeating louder than the engines. What did I just do to my family? Freedom didn't feel like freedom yet. It felt like waiting for consequences. Hours later, the news broke. Soviet officials admitted he was gone. The coach was Viktor Tikhonov. He claimed that Fedorov's sudden departure was not an ordinary action and warned that any other Soviet player trying to follow would face terrible punishment.
And I know I can play a little bit of hockey, so I was willing to take some risk and some danger.
Back home, his parents had no warning, no explanation, just the sudden absence of their son. In Detroit, the contract was signed. Cameras flashed, headlines were written. To the outside world, this looked like a victory. Inside, it felt nothing like winning. The escape was over. What came next was silence, distance, and the work of becoming someone else. When Fedorov arrived in Detroit in the summer of 1990, the reality set in immediately. He was alone in a city where nothing sounded familiar. Detroit signed him to a 5-year, $3.5 million deal. It was the most complex and risky international commitment the franchise had ever made. But they were speaking a language he didn't understand, sitting in an empty apartment thousands of miles from the life he left behind. But the first time he skated in practice, the uncertainty stopped mattering. Steve Yzerman watched how fast he reached top speed. Mark Howe saw how difficult it was to knock him off balance. Head coach Brian Murray realized he was looking at movement you couldn't teach. What he needed help with was everything else. Sean Burr became his road roommate and guide. Burr handled the small things, ordering food, navigating hotels, and translating jokes. There were misunderstandings at first, including one moment when Fedorov earnestly told him, "I need love," only for everyone to realize he was asking for new hockey gloves. Other teammates stepped in. Yzerman, Probert, Koser, Zombo. They included him without making a show of it. Rides, meals, locker room chatter. Slowly, the space stopped feeling foreign. On the ice, the adjustment came faster. In his first NHL game, Fedorov scored on instinct. By the end of his rookie season, he had 31 goals and 79 points and earned a place on the NHL All-Rookie team. For the first time, success was his alone. No handlers, no permission. The transformation was obvious, but with that came a new level of attention. By the early 90s, Sergei Fedorov was no longer adjusting to the NHL. Every shift created problems that teams had no answer for. Then the numbers caught up. The 1993-94 season changed how the league talked about him. He finished with 56 goals and 120 points while handling shutdown assignments. His 120 points placed him second in the league that year, finishing 10 points behind Wayne Gretzky. Critically, he also led the NHL in plus-minus with a rating of plus 48. By the end of the year, the awards followed. Hart Trophy, Lester B. Pearson Award, and Frank J. Selke Trophy. It forced the league to rethink what a complete forward looked like. He dominated offensively while shutting down the best players in the league. No matter how teams tried to contain him, the problem only changed form. Take away his scoring and he controlled the game. Lean on him physically and he skated away from it. Wayne Gretzky noticed. After facing Detroit that season, Gretzky said he had never seen a player dominate a game the way Fedorov did. Not in stretches, but game to game. For a player who once needed approval to leave his hotel room, controlling entire games felt surreal. Inside Detroit's locker room, the view was simpler. Steve Yzerman called him the most talented player he had ever played with. Scotty Bowman trusted him enough to move him wherever the team needed help. That trust led to one of the most debated decisions of Fedorov's career. Bowman began using him on defense. Over the next 2 months, Fedorov played 7 games on the blue line. The move was risky, but during that stretch, Detroit defended better, won games, and the criticism faded quickly. Why push an elite forward into a heavier role? The answer was leverage. From defense, Fedorov could slow the game, start breakouts, and neutralize forechecks with speed alone. He didn't just survive the role, he handled it cleanly. Detroit won games during those stretches, and Bowman never apologized for it. It was another reminder that Fedorov was no longer fitting into systems. He was bending them. Some blamed the position switch when his scoring dipped slightly. Others blamed distractions. None of that changed how the coaching staff viewed him. He was carrying more responsibility, not less. At the same time, the scrutiny around him grew louder. Once Nike stepped in, attention followed him. The white skates became a visual marker. Away from the rink, interest shifted to his personal life, especially his relationship with Anna Kournikova. Suddenly, hockey shows weren't just breaking down shifts and matchups. Sports radio debated focus. Every scoring dip became a topic, but the noise stayed. Then the business side caught up. After the 1997 Stanley Cup, contract talks stalled. The season moved on without him. In February 1998, Carolina forced the issue with a massive offer sheet. The $38 million 6-year offer included a staggering $14 million bonus for the final season. Detroit matched the entire offer just 3 days before the deadline. When Fedorov returned, the atmosphere had changed. For the first time in his career in Detroit, he heard boos when he touched the puck, and for a player who had risked everything to choose his own future, being questioned hurt in a different way. Detroit won another Stanley Cup that spring. Fedorov contributed when it mattered, but something had shifted. The player trusted to handle any role on the ice now carried questions that followed him everywhere else. What didn't change was effectiveness. An MVP season, multiple Selke trophies, Stanley Cups. The problem was never his performance. It was how the world reacted when he stopped fitting the story they wanted. Every contract became a headline. Every decision turned into a debate. When things went right, it was expected. When anything went wrong, it landed on him. The isolation Sergei Fedorov felt when he first arrived had been replaced by something revolutionary. Scotty Bowman united him with Slava Fedosov, Igor Larionov, Vladimir Konstantinov, and Vyacheslav Kozlov to form the Russian Five, a unit that played the game in a way the league had never seen. While the rest of the league relied on dumping the puck and grinding in corners, Fedorov and his countrymen moved in perfect rhythm, making passes through lanes that didn't seem to exist until they created them. The most famous example came during the 1996 playoffs, where they completed a complex, dizzying cycle play that resulted in a goal against the St. Louis Blues, a play Bowman later called the perfect shift. That brilliance helped deliver 3 Stanley Cups to Detroit, but Fedorov's leadership often looked different than what fans expected. He wasn't the loudest voice in the room or the captain wearing the C. Instead, he led with a quiet, undeniable dominance that anchored the team for over a decade. In the summer of 2003, the relationship between Fedorov and the Red Wings finally fractured. After 13 seasons, contract disputes and a desire for a new challenge led him to sign with the Mighty Ducks of Anaheim. The exit was painful. For years, Detroit fans argued about the departure, feeling a mix of betrayal and loss. The breakup said more about expectations than effort. By the time he was inducted into the Hockey Hall of Fame in 2015, the bitterness had faded, replaced by the undeniable realization that the league had witnessed a once-in-a-lifetime talent. The boos from 1998 were gone, replaced by a deep appreciation and love for the superstar who paved the way for every Russian player who followed. He wasn't loved because he was perfect. He was loved because everything he did mattered. And then came the final twist in the story, the one that feels almost impossible considering where it began. After retiring, Fedorov didn't stay in the comfort of North America. He returned to Russia, not as a defector, but as the head coach of CSKA Moscow, the iconic army team he once had to flee. The same system he escaped was now looking to him for direction. He installed the NHL blueprint back home, leading CSKA to back-to-back Gagarin Cups. It brings his journey to a complete circle. The 20-year-old who walked through a hotel hallway in fear had grown into a man who could walk back into Moscow on his own terms. The system that once controlled him now had to adapt to him. Did freedom give him everything he dreamed of? Perhaps not every day was perfect, but looking at the legacy he built, it's clear that the escape didn't just save his career. It allowed him to reshape the entire hockey world in his image. Mogilny ran. Fedorov waited. Artemi Panarin chose. By the time Panarin came along, the wall wasn't gone, but it had cracks. He didn't defect in secret or vanish overnight. He turned down everything he was supposed to want. In 2015, he was offered a blank check to be the face of Russian hockey.
Лучший русский игрок НХЛ был когда-то.
Instead, he signed a cheap entry-level contract to be a nobody in America. This is the raw, unfiltered story of how Artemi Panarin ran away from a fortune to chase a dream and ended up with both. In the spring of 2015, Artemi Panarin was on the top of the Russian hockey world. He was a 23-year-old star, a key player who had just helped the powerhouse SKA St. Petersburg team to a Gagarin Cup championship. He was a hero, and the KHL was prepared to make him a very rich man to stay. Lucrative long-term contracts were laid at his feet, offering him a life of comfort and security in his home country. But Panarin had a different plan. On April 29, 2015, he shocked the Russian hockey world by turning his back on that guaranteed fortune. He signed a cheap 2-year entry-level contract with the Chicago Blackhawks. He was taking a massive financial risk, running away from a secure future to take a minimum-level deal in a league that had never given him a second glance. He was a complete unknown, heading to a new country where he spoke no English, all for a chance to prove something to himself. To understand why a man would walk away from millions, you have to understand the place he came from. Panarin was born in 1991 in Korkina, a small, bleak industrial town on the edge of Siberia. It was a place of extreme poverty, a coal mining town often described as an environmental disaster zone choked with pollution. It was a tough place to grow up, a town with very little opportunity, high crime, and widespread alcoholism. His own family life was unstable from the start. His parents divorced when he was just 3 months old. His mother, who was only 20, and his father were largely absent as they struggled to find work in the harsh post-Soviet economy. From infancy, Panarin was raised almost entirely by his maternal grandparents. His grandfather, Vladimir Levin, became the central figure in his life. Vladimir, a former amateur hockey player himself, saw a spark in his young grandson, and he made a choice. He would dedicate his entire life to fueling that spark. He became Panarin's father figure, his mentor, his coach, and his biggest supporter. In a town where so many kids fell through the cracks, Vladimir was a relentless force of stability and discipline. The sacrifices were immense. His grandfather brought Panarin his first pair of skates and would often buy him food when the family had none. The local rink in Corkina was in terrible condition, so Vladimir would drive his grandson 25 miles each way multiple times a week in a rundown old car to a better hockey school in the city of Chelyabinsk. This was a huge financial and personal burden, a gamble of time and money on a little kid's dream. Panarin would later say, with full certainty, "My grandfather is the most important person in my life. He did everything for me. He took me to practice. Without him, I would be nothing. I would probably still be in Corkina, drinking beer on a bench." This was the chip on Panarin's shoulder. He wasn't just playing for himself. He was paying to repay his grandfather's incredible sacrifice. But the path to the NHL wasn't easy. Despite his emerging skill in Russia, he was consistently overlooked by NHL scouts. He was eligible for the NHL entry draft in both 2010 and 2011 and was passed over by all 30 teams multiple times. He was labeled as too small, too frail, and a perimeter player whose skills wouldn't translate to the smaller, rougher North American ice. He was, in the eyes of the world's best league, a reject. He began his pro career in the KHL with Vityaz Chekhov, a team that was notoriously known as the goon squad of the league, famous more for its brawlers than its skill. For a small, skilled player like Panarin, it was a brutal environment. He had to learn to survive, to use his quickness to avoid being destroyed by his own teammates in practice, let alone by opponents. His career finally took off when he was traded to the powerhouse SKA St. Petersburg, where he was placed on a line with former NHL superstar Ilya Kovalchuk. He blossomed, becoming a true star and a Gagarin Cup champion. By 2015, he had finally achieved the secure, rich life he had been working towards. He could have stayed in Russia, been the face of a franchise, and cashed in. But the sting of being undrafted, of being told he wasn't good enough for the NHL, still lingered. He wasn't just playing for money. He was playing to prove a point. And that's why, at 23 years old, he made his first great runaway, betting on himself and leaving millions on the table for a shot at the unknown. He had taken the biggest gamble of his life, arriving in a new country with no guaranteed spot and speaking no English. Now he had to prove he wasn't just a KHL star, but that he belonged with the best in the world. When Artemi Panarin landed in Chicago in the summer of 2015, he was a complete unknown. He was 23 years old, walking away from a massive contract in his home country, all for a cheap 2-year entry-level deal that didn't even guarantee him a spot on the team. The Blackhawks were a modern dynasty, just months away from winning their 3rd Stanley Cup in 6 seasons. Their roster was stacked with superstars. Panarin wasn't just joining a new team. He was trying to crack one of the best lineups in the entire NHL. The challenges were immediate and overwhelming. He spoke almost no English, isolating him from his new teammates and coaches. He had to navigate a new city, a new culture, and a new style of hockey on the smaller North American ice, all while carrying the immense pressure of his financial gamble. If he failed, if he got cut and sent to the minor leagues, he would have thrown away a fortune for nothing. But the Blackhawks coaching staff, led by Joe Quenneville and his new superstar teammate Patrick Kane, saw the raw skill he possessed.
You know what, he's a very skilled player. You know, for the people that don't get to see him much, you're going to be very entertained when you watch him play. He's got great hands, great shot.
In a move that would change the landscape of the league, the coaches decided to put the unknown Russian rookie on a line with their American superstar. The chemistry was instant and spectacular. Panarin, who could barely communicate with Kane verbally, developed what Kane would later call the hockey language. They just understood each other on the ice. Panarin's elite vision and lethal shot perfectly complemented Kane's brilliant playmaking. The undrafted runaway wasn't just keeping up. He was dominating. He earned the nickname the Bread Man.
Coach Quenneville, because my last name really close with Panera Bread, so he just say Bread Man and everybody doing that.
He was quickly becoming a fan favorite. His rookie season was one of the greatest by an undrafted player in modern history. He played with creativity and confidence that was shocking for a first-year player. He finished the season with 30 goals and 47 assists for 77 points, finishing in the top 10 in the entire league in scoring. He didn't just make the team. He was one of their best players. At the end of the season, the choice was obvious. Panarin won the Calder Memorial Trophy as the NHL's Rookie of the Year, beating out other highly touted rookies like Connor McDavid. The kid from the polluted mining town of Corkina, the player every team had passed on in the draft, was now officially the best rookie in the world. His gamble had paid off. He followed it up with another great season, proving he was no fluke. He had found a home. But this is where his story takes its next turn. After just 2 seasons in Chicago, the Blackhawks were facing a severe salary cap crunch. Panarin's entry-level deal was up, and he was due a massive raise, a raise the team could simply not afford. On June 23, 2017, in a move that stunned the hockey world, Panarin was traded to the Columbus Blue Jackets. He was once again being forced to move, a victim of his own success. He had proven he was an elite player, but now he had to do it all over again in a new city, this time without Patrick Kane by his side. His superstar performance in Chicago had earned him a massive payday and a one-way ticket out of town. Now, traded to Columbus, he faced a new challenge, proving to the world he wasn't just Patrick Kane's sidekick. His arrival in Columbus was his chance to silence that last doubt for good. When Artemi Panarin arrived in Columbus for the 2017-18 season, he wasn't a rookie hoping to make the team anymore. He was a 26-year-old star, the centerpiece of a major trade, and he was expected to be the engine of the Blue Jackets offense. He was finally the #1 guy, the franchise player, and he did not disappoint. Any doubts that he was just a product of Patrick Kane were immediately erased. Panarin was dominant. He played with a confidence and creativity that Columbus had never seen before. He finished his first season with a new franchise record 82 points, carrying the team to the playoffs. He proved he was an elite driver of offense on his own.
Just a great pro. One of the hardest working guys on our team. One of the hardest guys, I think, in the National Hockey League on pucks and one-on-one battles.
He followed that up with an even better season in 2018-19. He broke his own franchise record, posting 87 points and leading the Blue Jackets to the most shocking playoff upset in recent memory, a 4-game sweep of the 62-win Tampa Bay Lightning, one of the most dominant regular season teams in NHL history. Panarin was the hero of Ohio, a superstar who had elevated the entire franchise. The Blue Jackets and their GM, Jarmo Kakalainen, were desperate to keep him.
He's a great pro. He's a good example to all the young guys as well, how he handles his business every day.
They offered him a blank check, a massive 8-year contract extension that would have made him the face of the franchise for the next decade. But in a move that stunned the hockey world for the second time, Panarin refused. He wouldn't even negotiate.
And I hope that they want to stay. They're happy in Columbus. They want to stay. We have a good team.
He had decided once again to bet on himself. He wanted to test the open market of free agency, a right he had earned. This was the second runaway of his career. He played out the entire 2018-19 season as a lame duck, a player everyone in the building knew was leaving. It was an awkward and tense situation, but Panarin still played his heart out, leading the team on that incredible playoff run. The fans in Columbus felt betrayed, but Panarin had his eyes on a bigger prize. On July 1st, 2019, his gamble paid off. Panarin signed a massive 7-year, $81.5 million contract with the New York Rangers. His $11.64 million average salary made him one of the highest-paid players in the entire NHL. The undrafted kid from Corkina, the KHL runaway, was now the king of New York. He had reached the absolute peak of his profession. But it was at this peak, just days after signing his life-altering contract, that Panarin made a decision that had nothing to do with hockey. A decision that was brave, dangerous, and would eventually lead to his rock bottom. In a candid interview back in Russia, he did the unthinkable. He openly criticized Russian President Vladimir Putin. In a country where athletes are expected to be silent patriots, Panarin spoke his mind. He said he no longer believed Putin knew what is right and wrong, and called the regime lawless. It was a shocking act of defiance. For the next year and a half, Panarin was the toast of New York, a Hart Trophy MVP finalist who seemed untouchable. But the regime he had criticized had not forgotten. In February 2021, the hit job came. A fabricated story suddenly surfaced in a pro-Kremlin Russian newspaper. Panarin's former KHL coach, Andrei Nazarov, a vocal Putin supporter, claimed that back in 2011, Panarin had assaulted an 18-year-old girl in a hotel bar in Latvia. The allegation was immediately and forcefully denied by Panarin and the New York Rangers. The team released a powerful statement, calling it a fabricated story and a political intimidation tactic being used against him for his outspoken political comments. This was Panarin's true rock bottom. The allegation itself was serious, but the implications were terrifying. It was a clear threat. Panarin was deeply distressed, not for himself, but for the safety of his family still living in Russia. He was unable to focus on hockey, his mind a world away. The political machine he had dared to criticize was now trying to crush him. He was forced to take an indefinite leave of absence from the team to deal with the stress and ensure his family's safety. He missed 9 games. The runaway star had finally been stopped in his tracks by a force much bigger than hockey. Alright, quick breather. If you're enjoying this and not just scrolling for highlights, hit that subscribe button. Don't make it weird. And if you really want to back the boys, hit join and hop on the Skates and Scarlets crew. Appreciate ya. Now let's get back to it before someone misses another open net. The political hit job was designed to silence him, to break his spirits. It did the exact opposite. Artemi Panarin returned to the New York Rangers lineup after his 2-week leave of absence, not as a broken or intimidated player, but as a man who seemed more determined than ever. The attempt to smear his name and threaten his family had failed to derail him. He finished the 2021 season strong, proving his resilience. This event marked the final phase of his journey. He had overcome poverty. He had overcome being undrafted. He had overcome the pressure of his first contract, the challenge of his second team, and now he had faced down a politically motivated attack. All that was left to do was to cement his legacy as one of the greatest players on the planet, and that's exactly what he did. In the seasons that followed, Panarin was not just good. He was consistently breathtakingly elite. He became the undisputed heart and soul of the New York Rangers offense, the engine that made the entire team go. In the 2021-22 season, he put up a stunning 96 points. He followed that up with another dominant campaign in 2022-23, scoring 92 points. He was no longer just a star. He was a perennial MVP candidate, a player who made everyone around him better. But his ultimate on-ice triumph, his true masterpiece, came in the 2023-24 season. From the very first game, Panarin played with a new level of confidence and joy. He was electric every time he touched the puck, a constant threat to score from anywhere on the ice. He finished the season with career highs in both goals and points, scoring 49 goals and adding 71 assists for a staggering 120 points. It was one of the most dominant offensive seasons in the history of the storied Rangers franchise. He was once again named a finalist for the Hart Trophy as the league's MVP. This was the final vindication. The kid from the polluted mining town of Corkina, the player every team passed on in the draft, the runaway who bet on himself not once but twice, had now become one of the most valuable and celebrated players in the entire world. His $11.64 million salary, once seen as a massive risk by some, now looked like a bargain. He had reached the absolute pinnacle of the sport. His legacy is now twofold. On the ice, he's a shining example of how skill, creativity, and self-belief can triumph over a system that often prizes size and conformity. He's living proof that being undrafted is not a life sentence, but a motivating footnote. But his off-ice legacy is perhaps even more important. In a time when so many high-profile athletes chose silence, Artemi Panarin is a rare example of a Russian player who dared to speak his mind, to criticize a powerful regime, and to face the dangerous consequences head-on. He risked his and his family's safety to stand by his principles. His story is bigger than hockey. It's the story of a man who refused to be silenced, who bet on himself in every aspect of his life, and who won every single time. Artemi Panarin's story proves that betting on yourself beats betting on anyone else. The kid walked away from millions, came here, and built an empire just by wheeling and dealing. So what part of his story fired you up? Drop it in the comments, you beauties. We're already grinding on the next deep dive, so smash that subscribe button and don't let your grandma beat you to it, Wheels. And if you really want to back the squad, hit join and show us those hands aren't all stone and no finish.